strong because the U.S. economy and because people want to hold dollars and the safety.
What is the United States' involvement in regime change? Why is the dollar becoming so powerful day by day? What happened in Sri Lanka? US regime change and Imran Khan. China and the BRI project. Let's dive deeper into it. Involvement of the US in regime change. Throughout its history, US has used its military and covert operations to overthrow or prop up foreign governments in the name of preserving US strategic and business interests.
Forces who raided his hideout in Pakistan in the early hours of the morning. His body has already been committed to the sea from a US warship. The fortified compound...
Afghanistan. From December 6 to 17, 2001, a team of Northern Alliance fighters under US Special Forces team pursued bin Laden in the cave complex of Tora Bora in eastern Afghanistan.
In February 1998, bin Laden issued a religious statement, a fatwa, against all Americans and what he called...
But the US did not commit its troops to the operation and bin Laden escaped to neighboring Pakistan. That same month, the Taliban Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan fell and was replaced by the Afghan Interim Administration and then the Transitional Islamic State of Afghanistan in 2002. Bin Laden was killed by a team of United States Navy in a raid on his clandestine residence in Pakistan in May 2011.
The United States launched a targeted operation against that compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
Nearly 10 years after the initial invasion, the US remained in Afghanistan, propping up the governments of Hamid Karzai and Ashraf Ghani. Iraq. After the 9/11 attacks, the Bush administration claimed that Iraq's ruler at the time, Saddam Hussein, had connections to Al-Qaeda and was supporting terrorism. Also that Hussein was covertly continuing the production of weapons of mass destruction, although evidence for both was not conclusive. The Iraq War then began in March 2003, when the US-led military coalition invaded the country and overthrew the Iraqi government. In December 2011, the US withdrew its soldiers from the conflict, but returned in 2014 to help stop the rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The military's combat mission came to an end on December 9, 2021. Syria. In 2005, after a period of cooperation in the war on terror, the Bush administration froze relations with Syria. US State Department then began to funnel money to opposition groups, including at least $6 million to the anti-government satellite channel Barada TV and the exile group Movement for Justice and Development in Syria. This covert backing continued until at least April 2009.
Into a public skeptical about the war he's launched in Libya.
What we've done, what we plan to do, and why this matters.
Libya. In February 2011, amid the Arab Spring, a revolution broke out against him, spreading from the second city Benghazi to the capital Tripoli, sparkling the first Libyan civil war. France, the United States, and the United Kingdom launched the 2011 military intervention in Libya with Operation Odyssey Dawn. The Gaddafi government collapsed in August, leaving the National Transitional Council as the de facto government with UN recognition. Syria. In April 2011, after the outbreak of the Syrian civil war in early 2011, 3 US senators urged President Barack Obama in a joint statement to state unequivocally that it is time to go for President Bashar al-Assad. In August 2011,
For war, he was about to launch a massacre of his own people.
It was not in our national interest.
the US government called on Assad to step aside and imposed an oil embargo on the Syrian government. Starting in 2013, the US provided training, weapons and cash to Syrian-vetted moderate rebels, and in 2014, the Supreme Military Council.
It is much more relevant compared to what might be going in the Oregus. 100,000 Kashmiris.
The US regime change and Imran Khan. The former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, said that the US-backed regime changed because it wanted to have military bases in Pakistan and use the country once again to meet its foreign policy objectives in the region and beyond. He also said that the US once again wants to have bases in Pakistan and use the country against Russia. Speaking at a seminar titled Regime Change Impact on Politics, Security and Economy, he said that regime change has profoundly harmed Pakistan. During his tenure, Imran has repeatedly said that giving military bases to the US for its future operations in Afghanistan was out of the question. At one point, Imran had categorically said that Pakistan would absolutely not allow any bases to the US and use of its territory for any sort of action inside Afghanistan. During a meeting of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, the country's civil and military leadership emphasized that Pakistan was ready to face any consequence, but would not permit the US to establish any airbase on its soil. The PTI chairman recalled that Pakistan paid a huge price for taking part in the war on terror, but the US never even thanked it for standing by it, adding that the reason was that we allow others to use us like a tissue paper. Because of the regime change, Imran said that there was an ongoing debate about what had happened to the country, regretting that these thieves have plunged the country into a quagmire. Imran Khan struck a deal to import natural gas from Russia.
Prime Minister Alexander Valentinovich Novak. Multiple media interviews. A lot has been lined up for Imran Khan's two-day visit to Moscow.
Despite outcry over the invasion of Ukraine, as countries imposed sanctions and wanted to isolate Vladimir Putin, Khan became the first leader to sign a new trade deal with Russia since the attack.
President Putin reaffirmed this relationship when he visited India.
They signed a bilateral agreement, and Khan also agreed to import 2 million tons of wheat from Russia. We have signed agreements with them to import natural gas because Pakistan's own gas reserves are depleting. Inshallah, the time will tell. We had great discussions, Khan said.
How Imran Khan cited the secret letter that was allegedly containing the words.
After that, the top diplomats of 22 countries called on Pakistan to support a resolution condemning Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the UN General Assembly. Russia's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said despite pressure from the US to cancel his visit to Moscow, Khan went ahead with his trip. Zakharova said in a commentary on the controversy over Khan's allegation that the US was trying to effect a regime change in Islamabad. Russian state media also broadcasted images of Khan and Putin shaking hands and sitting down together in Moscow. Hours after Putin declared war on Ukraine officially, the US reacted angrily to the news of Khan's visit to Russia, even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. Russia criticized the US, saying, "This is another attempt of shameless interference by the US in the internal affairs of an independent state for its selfish purposes." The above facts eloquently testify to this and asserted that Prime Minister Imran Khan was paying the price for being disobedient and being punished for visiting Russia in February. Washington had decided to punish a disobedient Imran Khan, which also explained why several members of Khan's ruling coalition decided to switch sides and shift their allegiances ahead of the April 3 no-trust vote. Khan had named senior US diplomat Donald Lu as a person who was allegedly involved in the foreign conspiracy to oust his government through a no-confidence vote tabled by the opposition. Khan claimed the US had delivered a diplomatic warning, a letter to Pakistan to remove him as Prime Minister. The diplomatic missive, the alleged US threat, and Khan's claim that the no-confidence was part of a US-led conspiracy roiled Pakistani politics and civil-military relations. The US dollar also went up to Rs 246, increasing inflationary pressure and foreign debt burden as the political chaos continued further. The rupee devaluation will significantly increase the debt component and imported inflation. The situation would also harm the cost of doing business in Pakistan. In addition to that, it will also downgrade Pakistan's ratings and massively hit its current account deficit and deplete reserves. The national currency is also under pressure due to the stalled IMF Extended Fund Facility, all the better recipe for US intervention and regime change in Pakistan. The rising power of the dollar. There have been periods of stagflation, which is defined as high inflation and high unemployment. But the US dollar has remained the world's reserve currency. The dollar remains the world's reserve currency today. Central banks hold around 59% of their reserves in US dollars according to the IMF. Many of these reserves are in cash or US bonds, such as US treasuries. Dollar-denominated debt outside the US continues to rise, with levels reaching $13.4 trillion as of mid-2022. Money supply M2 in the US has skyrocketed over the last 2 decades, up from $4.6 trillion in 2000 to $19.5 trillion in 2021. The effects of the rise in money supply were amplified by the financial crisis of 2008 and more recently by the COVID-19 pandemic. Around 20% of all US dollars in the money supply, $3.4 trillion, were created in 2020 alone. But the hold of dollar on the global economic market and being the world's reserve currency steals the deal of it is so powerful.
Sri Lanka is facing its worst economic crisis since its independence. But just how did the situation...
What happened in Sri Lanka? According to Vijayawardena, the country was going into an economic crisis in 2015. Inflation, political turmoils, and mismanagement from the government fueled the matter further. The government blamed the COVID pandemic, which badly affected Sri Lanka's tourist trade. It also says tourists were frightened off by a series of deadly bomb attacks in 2019. Many experts blame President Rajapaksa's poor economic mismanagement. At the end of its civil war in 2009, Sri Lanka chose to focus on providing goods to its domestic market, instead of trying to boost foreign trade. This meant its income from exports to other countries remained low, while the bill for imports kept growing. Mr. Rajapaksa was also criticized for the big tax cuts he introduced in 2019, which lost the government income of more than $1.4 billion a year.
This crisis could bring even more pain. Now, the island nation has suspended sovereign debt payments. Ratings agencies are expected to place it in default. Meanwhile,
when Sri Lanka's foreign currency shortages became a serious problem in early 2021, the government tried to limit them by banning imports of chemical fertilizer. This led to widespread crop failure. Sri Lanka had to supplement its food stocks from abroad, which made its foreign currency shortage even worse. The country doesn't have enough fuel for buses, trains, and medical vehicles, and says it doesn't have enough foreign currency to import more. This lack of fuel has caused petrol and diesel prices to rise dramatically. Sri Lanka is unable to buy the goods it needs from abroad, and in May, it failed to make an interest payment on its foreign debt for the first time in its history. China and the BRI project. The Belt and Road Initiative is a global infrastructure development strategy adopted by the Chinese government in 2013 to invest in nearly 70 countries and international organizations. The BRI forms a central component of Xi's major country diplomacy strategy, which calls for China to assume a greater leadership role in global affairs per its rising power and status.
If you connect the dots, it's not hard to see which country that is. This is China's Belt and Road Initiative, the most ambitious...
As of March 2022, 146 countries were listed as having signed up to the BRI. A report on China's international development projects between 2000 and 2017 demonstrates that expensive high-interest lending by China's state-backed banks has left countries across the developing world struggling under debt loads. Some of the development projects those loans funded face major implementation problems. The study provides a clearer picture of why China has invested its enormous foreign currency reserves in loans to the developing world. The Belt and Road Initiative is designed not just to cement new trading relationships with countries around the world, but to lock in China's access to natural resources and other commodities that it does not produce internally. Of the 165 countries where China has made development loans since 2000, the study finds that 42 now carry debt to China equal to or greater than 10% of gross domestic product. In the case where they lend money, the focus is on furthering economic development in the host country. China, by contrast, lends intending to earn an economic return. The average loan from an OECD creditor has a 1% interest rate. The average loan from an official Chinese creditor is over 4%. If you found the video informative, do like the video and don't forget to subscribe for more updates.